Are your employees burning out, jumping ship every 2 years? Are shrinking margins piling on the pressure as your market becomes more competitive by the day? It feels like a constant race, always on edge, barely a step ahead of the competition, but only if you're running at full speed. This isn't just exhausting, it's unsustainable. But here's the good news. It doesn't have to be this way. In my keynotes, I help companies break free to re-energize their team, develop a culture where innovation thrives, and get their employees excited to fight for the corporate mission once again.
The good news, we don't have to wait 10 or 20 years for the next breakthrough. We can start innovating with what we have today. Our challenge, though, is that we are going to have to scale and dramatically grow those technologies so they can be used by the masses.
Imagine unlocking a strategy so powerful, it doesn't just transform your business, it revolutionizes your industry. This isn't just any strategy. It's the secret sauce for innovation used at Fortune 500 companies to startups alike. From the halls of the UN Foundation and World Bank to nimble, fast-growing startups and SPACs, I've honed this strategy to spark breakthroughs. And now, I'm here to share it with you, to help your business achieve the kind of growth that sets it apart in its industry. And I'll give you a sneak peek into the key part of this innovation strategy. Environmental sustainability could be your company's greatest asset. The Sustainability Innovation Framework forces efficiency, elevates quality, and inspires your team to rally not only around the company, but around the greater cause. Silicon Valley startups have harnessed these principles for decades to become leaders in innovation. Why is it that sustainable organizations are consistently quicker to market, better at retaining talent, and faster at developing IP? Because sustainable thinking is inherently more innovative and demands out-of-the-box solutions. Unleash the innovation that your team needs, and let me guide you in transforming the future of your business, starting today.
Hello viewers, right now I am in conversation with world top expert Miss Vinisha Thompson ma'am, and you must be knowing her because she is very famous in the realm of innovation strategies. She's top expert. She has been considered as a top expert on building resilience and breakthrough innovation strategies, right? And I have been through her website and the kind of work she's doing. I have prepared some intro which you guys must understand because ma'am, in India I guess your kind of experts are very rare in general because there are very few experts on sustainability expert, but there is a high demand. Like people and founders are really excited to know and bring. So guys, Vinisha Thompson is a distinguished strategic innovation expert, as I mentioned earlier, right? That's just phenomenal on doing with over a decade of experience. So we will discuss that when did she started her journey and how did she became such kind of expert, and she has expertise on finance, technology, and all the nature of conservancy, the UN Foundation, and various Silicon Valley's startups. She worked with Silicon Valley's leaders as well, and she has also been managing director of the sustainability expert. Vinisa, ma'am, also leads initiatives that harmonize environmental goals with business objectives. So a lot of things, a lot of exciting things we're gonna discuss and talk in this podcast, and I'm actually very pumped up because it is my first podcast which I'm going to have on sustainability and actually practical innovation strategies. So first of all, thank you so much ma'am for taking out your precious time to be on the show. Thank you ma'am for taking.
Yeah, thank you so much for that kind introduction. That was incredible. Thank you.
Yeah, so ma'am, I would like to begin the conversation because a lot of viewers wants to know about that. How did you started this journey? I mean, how did this idea crossed your mind that now I will train big MNCs and companies on this specific realm, right? So tell me your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I grew up in Silicon Valley, in the San Francisco Bay Area in California in the US. And I feel like we have a very unique culture in Silicon Valley. And of course, it's a very global culture as well, too. There's over 120 languages spoken on any given day in Silicon Valley. So it's a very diverse melting pot that I think is a very unique place in the world. And so when I was growing up, I think today there's a lot of Silicon Valleys all over the world in various cities. But when I was growing up, it was just the San Francisco Bay Area being Silicon Valley. And I think there's something unique about it in the sense that we actually really embrace this risk-taking, experimentative, and also, kind of this tolerance for failure a lot of times too. When you talk to VCs that come from Silicon Valley, oftentimes they want the founder to have actually had a few failed businesses before they came in to ask for that money. They see it as experience. So it's a really interesting place to be. One experience that I had at UC Berkeley that I think is a perfect example of this is I walked into a laboratory and there was a showcase, and there was this one guy who had just made this microscope that could attach to your iPhone. And I said, "Wow, that's so cool. Can I look at it?" And he said, "Yeah, but the glue's still drying, so just be careful." So that's kind of an example of it. We're constantly experimenting. It's always fresh, it's always new.
Mm,
And so I think that really kind of guided me in terms of how I went through kind of my philosophy throughout my own life.
mm,
Um, so as you mentioned, I worked at a few, Silicon Valley startups. I also worked at some larger organizations as well too. And having seen all of these startups, I wanted to kind of understand, why is it that certain companies are quicker to market, faster at developing IP, and better at retaining talent? What is it, and what are the characteristics of those companies that are inherently more innovative? And so that's kind of what took me down the path of writing this book and doing public speaking and consulting and things like that, is really wanting to answer this question. And the book, which I know you mentioned as well, it really goes into 60 case studies of successful companies that have become more innovative using these strategies. So it's a very practical, hands-on case study based book. But yeah, that's kind of my passion and how I got into it. But really wanting to kind of ask those questions as to what makes a company innovative compared to its peers,
mm,
and what is the structure, what is the organization that really makes that possible.
that is incredible, ma'am. And ma'am, you mentioned about that you have, created or made, case studies on big companies like Netflix and all. I was watching. So, ma'am, I'd like to ask that what is the one thing that actually makes companies survive and thrive during uncertain, uncertainty? So, what will be your insight that how can a company can survive in uncertainty when it becomes very uncertain, right?
It's so important to set context for that as well, too, because markets are more competitive today than they've really ever been. In the 1950s, a company could expect to be on the Fortune 500 list for 65 years. And now a company is kicked off every 2 weeks from that list. So markets are inherently more competitive than they've ever been before. And so the stakes could not be higher for most companies. And I'm sure that a lot of people listening to this are also experiencing that too. They're really feeling market competition being much more aggressive today than really it's ever been. So it's really important to be thinking about growth. McKinsey research showcases that if you invest during recessions in innovation programs and R&D programs, it has 30% higher growth revenue after you come out of that economic downturn. The reverse is also true. So Harvard Business, a review research showcases that if you don't invest in innovation during those economic downturns, over the long term, you'll have at least 20% decrease of revenue growth over time. So it's really vital that we see these times of uncertainty and economic downturns as actually an opportunity to be thinking about, how can we invest in innovation programs? How can we think about resilient leadership, resilient culture, encourage risk taking, rapid iteration? All of these things are vital to be thinking about in times of uncertainty. And it's kind of counterintuitive, because most companies, they'll think about, how can we cut our budget? How can we, contract as an organization to be able to survive that economic uncertainty? The reality is that this is actually your opportunity to gain competitive advantage, to maybe buy out, some assets while they're underpriced, to maybe start thinking about, how can we actually invest in a completely new product or service?
Mm,
Because if you're thinking in this scarcity mentality, your company's not going to last for very long. You have to think about this as really an opportunity to be more efficient. So, I mean, yes, you mentioned a case study of Netflix as well too, but there's even some other kind of famous Silicon Valley examples of case studies of this. Amazon invested heavily in AWS in the 2008 financial recession in the US, as well as Apple. They invested heavily in the iPhone development and App Store during 2008. And coming out of that, they were able to really lead in the market. So if you're thinking about, how do I not only survive, but how do I lead in the market? It's really taking advantage of these
mm.
times of uncertainty as maybe your key competitive advantage.
Right, and it is very, very practical thing you have mentioned, ma'am. And I'd like to say that, before some days I was talking to an expert on sustainability. He was from India. So, but the difference I can see between you and him was, you are talking about you are actually talking about the practical, case studies which has already been happened in the company. So it makes viewers and a lot of people very curious that we should learn from the top 500 for fortune companies and these practical case studies instead of learning theoretical things from Google and read stuff. So it is
Mhm.
very significant
Yeah.
to mention. And ma'am, I'd like to ask that company must balance incremental versus disruptive innovation. And you have
Yeah.
had case studies on even that that as well, Netflix. So tell me and actually explain the research and what is the thing.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, to answer your question, I think this ties nicely into the past question as well too. We have to think about not only innovation but disruptive innovation. And what I mean by that is disruptive innovation is where it's in a completely new technology or product in the market. So you can think of something like Uber. This is something that completely radicalized transportation industry,
That's good.
back, 10 years back. Incremental innovation is like what we see with our annual updates to the iPhone or something like that. You see a few new features, you see a few new improvements. So that's kind of iterative. It's incremental innovation, and both are important. And McKinsey has a great rule for this. They say 70-20-10, and they said 70% should be incremental innovation, where you're constantly improving your services and products.
Mm,
20% should be adjacent innovation, and 10% should be that disruptive innovation that I talked about. That's the radical business model shifts. And in order to do that, you actually have to invest quite a bit and also be thinking about how are we going to structure innovation in this regard. Oftentimes, companies, if they want to think about disruptive innovation, they'll say, we want 30% of our revenue 2 years from now to come from products that we don't have yet in our portfolio. That's a great way to think about metrics for how to incorporate disruptive innovation into their organizational structure. And these are really, really important.
right.
Of course, you mentioned Netflix. I think this is a good example of this because even though, Netflix has had some slowdowns as of late, they've actually continually actually invested in themselves and had a few disruptive innovations that they were able to go past, whereas Blockbuster and some other competitors were thinking more iteratively, right? They were thinking about, okay, we're going to improve our services, we're going to improve our storefronts, these kind of things, which is great. But when you're in a very competitive market, you have to continually be thinking about how am I going to be disruptive? And by the time that your competitor is being disruptive, it's already too late. So you have to be the one who's disrupting yourself continually. So it might be through an acquisition of a startup. That's one way you can, think about disruptive innovation. Or
Mm,
it could be thinking about how are we actually going to change our organizational structure to actually reward some level of risk taking. So there's a lot of different ways to structure it, but I think that creating a structure is really key. And when our audience is listening to this today, I think that they really need to think about how am I going to actually implement structure? Because it's easy to talk about I'm going to, invest in disruptive innovation, but the reality is it's very difficult. So how are you going to create a structure for this? This is something Disney actually has done a wonderful job of. They're a very innovative business. They come up with incredible movies and products. And one of the ways they're able to do that is they actually create a physical structure in their offices for disruptive innovation. So they have three types of rooms for office spaces. One is the disruptive, crazy ideas, and you only book those office spaces when you want to share a completely crazy, off the wall, radical idea. The
right.
next is actually trying to hone all of those different crazy, wild ideas, prioritize which ones make sense. And
Mm,
the last one is implementation. How are we actually going to get it done?
mm,
So if you have a meeting where you just want to get what's done necessary, in the next quarter, you're going to book a certain room for that. And everyone who comes into that room has a certain mindset that,
mm,
okay, we're just going to get stuff done. I'm not going to disrupt the meeting with my crazy ideas. And
mm,
then if you want to have a crazy idea that's actually going to be disruptive in the market, you book a special room for that. And what that
mm,
enables is it actually enables innovation within an organization. It's very hard for large organizations to be innovative, but this enables them to say, okay, I'm not going to get shot down immediately in the meeting when I come in with this wild new idea that could be really useful, but it's, crazy in the market today because everyone who walks into that room already knows that they're ready to hear that.
mm,
So this is a great example of something that, we can even do, even in smaller offices. Think about how are you going to create a physical structure for
mm.
innovation because it's so necessary in order to survive to think about innovation. So think about how are you going to implement it? How are you going to create that structure? And that's one way that I think that our audience could take something away from that.
Yeah, it is actually practical thing, and actually, I was reading on your website and a lot of articles about you that you are a dynamic speaker, and when I'm talking to
Oh,
you,
thank you.
really makes me feel like wow, the kind of the way you are explaining things, and you have given example of Disney that they have three rooms for different for innovation, and the third one is for execution. So it is something that not a lot of people knows about it, right? So and
Yeah.
so which I was so I mean very thankful to you that you are discussing these disruptive ideas which really helpful for a lot of founders and aspiring leaders. So ma'am, moving towards the next question, which is why do companies that double down on innovation in recessions outperform their competitors? I mean, how to outperform the competitors in the realm of
Yeah.
innovation and all.
Yeah, and I touched on a little bit of this before, but
Mm,
when we talked about even just the current case study of the Harvard Business Review, seeing if you don't invest in innovation during economic downturns, you
mm,
should expect at least a 20% decrease in your revenue growth rate over time. These are things that are really vital to be thinking about. But the reality is that the reason why investing in a recession is so important for your business and why it's so beneficial is it actually forces efficiency. You don't have unlimited resources, but you still have to create something new, something valuable to the market. And
mm,
that level of efficiency often enables a certain level of disruptive innovation. We see that the companies that have invested in innovation during these times actually have a lot of disruptive innovations. It actually forces a certain level of efficiency. And the reason for that is that because you don't have unlimited resources, you can't invest, potentially huge amounts of revenue
right.
into those R&D teams. You have to be very strategic about what creates value. And
Mm,
honing in on that actually is incredibly helpful. So it actually is a great opportunity for companies to start thinking about this is going to constrain us in a way that completely helps us rethink the problem. I think there's a great example of this actually in the medical industry.
mm,
There was this one doctor, Dr. Chisti, and he had this problem. There were respirators that help people breathe. They're very expensive. They're normally 10 to 15,000 US dollars
mm,
to purchase. And for a lot of hospitals around the world that may not have the resources to purchase these respirators, this can be a huge problem. It's a life-saving technology, but it's very expensive.
right.
And Dr. Chisti had seen so many of his patients die in his hospital and thought, I don't have unlimited resources. I don't have unlimited money, but I need to solve this problem. I need to create value in this way. And he came up with a $3 respirator, which is utterly remarkable. Specifically, it's tailored to infants. And he's reduced infant mortality in his hospital by 70% because of this. So, what this enabled him to do is he was highly motivated. He was
Right.
highly motivated to create that value, but he
Mm,
was also resource constrained.
mm,
There's, tons of brilliant dollars, brilliant doctors in the respirator market.
right.
They're not limited in terms of resources or college graduates or things like that, but only he figured out that breakthrough. And it's because he actually didn't have a lot of resources. So he had to throw out the old model and come up with a completely new one. And so when you're constrained, when you have a certain level of constraints, it actually enables you to completely rethink the problem. And I think that's a perfect example of it. But we see it even, with more famous examples like Tesla and Ford.
Good.
Tesla invests heavily in, their, automation and cars, during the 2008 recession.
Right.
Ford and GM cut resources back, and now they're trying to catch up. So again, this is something that's a really great opportunity, thinking about how can I actually create more value with more constrained resources. It's
Mm.
somewhat counterintuitive, but if you're able to master it, it's something that can really make you a leader in the market.
That is one of the practical thing you have mentioned. In very constant thing, how can people, innovate very innovative things? But ma'am, I would like to ask you, lot of people wants to become creative, wants to become innovative. Lot of entrepreneurs wants to create, innovative and create a product which should have a monopoly, in the market. So how can entrepreneurs can become innovative, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's difficult to be thinking about how am I going to be a leader in the market
Mm,
without, potentially chasing a fad blindly.
right.
And there's several ways to do this, but actually one of the best ways is something very surprising, which is actually to start to think about implementing some level of sustainability in your organization. This actually can be a guiding force to become more. And the reason I say that is when you just think about nature for a moment, it's highly competitive. Species are constantly fighting for survival and evolving and changing.
Right.
It's billions of years of R&D testing. Each organism is continually adapting themselves to those market conditions. And just like your business, it has to evolve, it has to compete. And
Mm,
so actually using some of the knowledge from nature can be a great way to think about your next idea.
right.
So even if you're not a sustainability company, this actually could be a source of innovation.
mm,
And it's called biomimicry. It's actually where you copy nature to develop a new product or service. And
mm,
scientists have been using this for a very long time. But one example of this is LED lighting. The very efficient light bulbs that's $1 trillion breakthrough in the market actually was based off of a firefly. Those little bugs that light up at night actually use 100% efficiency. Humans have not been able to master that yet. Their
mm,
bodies are structured in a way that maximizes light
right,
with using that much energy. And so scientists mimicked this in the light bulb and were able to create LED lighting.
mm,
The Shinkansen is one of the fastest trains. It's modeled after the kingfisher bird. Velcro was actually designed after those little seeds and burrs that you get stuck in your clothing when you go on hikes. And that created Velcro. So all of these things were created from nature. Nature's already done the hard work of doing the R&D testing. They've modeled it. It survives in the ecosystem. So whenever you're thinking about, does it need to be fast? Does it need to be strong? What
mm,
is the quality that I need? What in nature
mm,
does that? And can I actually use that as a source of innovation, as a source of hacking this problem by looking at what nature's already done? Interface is a great example of this. They're one of the most innovative companies in the United States. And they're a carpet manufacturing company, which
mm,
is pretty interesting, not normally the typical type of company you would think of being very innovative.
mm,
But they actually were able to replace glue, the glue that glues those carpets down to the floor, by mimicking the gecko hand on the bottom of their carpets because geckos can climb up a wall without any glue at all.
right,
And so mimicked that to create suction to the carpet to the floor.
mm,
And they were able to come up with something, and now they don't have to purchase glue. So this is a really, really interesting way that you can start to think about
mm.
what in nature does what my product needs to do. That could be a great question to just start off to be starting to think about how can I innovate my product? There's already so much great knowledge out there. Just look to nature first.
Exactly, ma'am, and you have answered answered in very simple way, which means that a lot of speakers or experts use very advanced terms to actually explain a lot of people, but you have used very layman language that we should work on innovation, especially if somebody, any entrepreneur, if watching the podcast, then he must be knowing that how crucial and how integral innovation be becomes for to create a innovative product and to actually capture the customers attention in the market. And ma'am, I would like to ask one general question what I ask to a lot of guests who comes on our channel, that you guys are communication expert, right? So, what are your top three advices that how to communicate in business? Like how to, like you have explained that how can people deal with uncertain, uncertainty in the realm of innovation. So, what are your top three advices for how to create innovative products or how to be innovative? Like, what are the top three things that an entrepreneur or leader should keep in mind, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of communicating and communicating innovation, I think that the three key things that are really important is first about thinking about what is your audience and what do they value? What is the most important to them? And it's true when you're talking about a presentation, it's also true when you're creating a product.
Mm,
Really deeply understanding who you're speaking to is really the way they are able to gain a competitive advantage and offer the necessary value that you need to. So the first thing is really thinking about who is your audience. The second thing I would say is storytelling. Our brains are wired to be thinking about stories. It's something
right.
that is the most ancient form of teaching is telling
Mm,
stories. So if you can tell a story, whether that's through the presentation or through the product, if you can tell a narrative that also your audience empathizes with and relates to, that's really important. And the last one is just keep things simple. Again, that's true with both. When we're talking about innovation, it's about efficiency. It's about
right.
not overcomplicating the process. It's
Right.
also true with communication, keeping
Right.
it very simple and straightforward. People
Mm.
are busy. They don't always have time to listen to your presentation or your particular topic. So make sure that you keep it simple for them.
Exactly, ma'am. And all these three things I have observed while talking to you in the podcast. So,
Thank
ma'am,
you.
I would like to know that what are the channels, I mean, you use, or your profile link, your website link, and your book. So please discuss about that. Why should people purchase your book? Because as of now we have discussed all about innovation, and viewers must be enjoying this. So what is this book about? Tell me.
Thank you so much for that. Yes. So, Accelerating Innovation is a
Mm,
book that's going to be released next year.
right.
And what it is 60 case studies of successful businesses that have become more innovative using these principles. So, there's 7 principles in the book that talk about why a certain company might be more innovative than another. And it's very case study based. It's very practical, again, very
Right.
story based. And I wanted this because our audience is mainly business leaders. They need to understand what is the practical implementation of this. I'm not going to
Right.
give you hypothetical research that
Right.
may or may not be applicable to your life. You need to
Right.
see the actionable results. And so this book is all about the case studies. And so
Mm,
that's what our book is. If you want to find our book join the waitlist for the book, you can find it on our website.
mm,
That's the-sustainability-experts.com. You can also find the Sustainability Experts, our podcast and our website and our LinkedIn page, all
mm.
under the same name, the Sustainability Experts. You can find us on all social media platforms, as well as all podcast channels from Apple Podcasts to Spotify. If you're interested in my speaking or consulting services,
Mm.
that's under a website called vanessathompson.com, just under my name. And my LinkedIn is also Vanessa Thompson. So happy to learn from your audience. Would love to collaborate with anyone and feel free to reach out.
Yeah, and actually, thousands of people. I will mention her, website or her book link or her LinkedIn link in the description so that you can approach her easily. And as you can see that how easily and how in layman language, she can explain even the top crucial things that should be explained with high meaning words, but she has explained in very simple words that anyone can understand. And the book is all about practical case studies, and she has also discussed every question with two or three practical company crisis which has already happened in the past. So we should really purchase the book and read all the principles, right? So thank you so much, ma'am, for being on the show, and it was really very insightful talking to you, and it was an insightful discussion, because the kind of insights you have explained, not a lot of experts explain publicly, because they think that if I will explain, and even if they explain, then they do not mention about case studies. They just use
Hmm.
terms and words. So it is really
Yeah.
exciting to know about case studies from you. So wonderful talking to you, Vinisha, ma'am. Thank you so much for being on the
Thank
show.
you so much.
Thank you.
Likewise.
Yeah.